Whole Hog Sports presents the basketball podcast of Mid-America, the premier Arkansas Hoops podcast, brought to you by Landers Toyota of Northwest Arkansas. With Whole Hog Sports basketball analyst Scotty Bordelon, here's your host, Matt Jones.
What a difference a week makes. Last Wednesday morning, Arkansas was 0-3 in SEC play. This week, on a three-game winning streak, they've won lopsided games over Missouri and South Carolina and won an impressive road game at LSU, ranked number 12 at the time, over the weekend. Up next for the Razorbacks is a home game Saturday night against Texas A&M, a chance to get some revenge for a loss to the Aggies a couple of weeks ago in College Station. We'll get into all of that today. Matt Jones with Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph of Whole Hog Sports, and the newly named 2021 Arkansas Sports Writer of the Year, Bob Holt of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Bob's now a four-time winner of that award. Only four sports writers have won it more times than he has, so congratulations on that, Bob. 3 was the number of the night Tuesday when the Razorbacks beat South Carolina 75-59 at Bud Walton Arena. As we mentioned, Arkansas now on a 3-game winning streak. The Razorbacks also failed to make a 3-point basket against the Gamecocks. That snapped a 33-year streak of games that the Razorbacks had made a 3-point shot, and that was the third longest in college basketball behind Duke and UNLV. Let's start with the winning streak, Scotty. It kind of feels like a video game. You know, when it's not going your way, you just hit reset and you try again. It kind of feels like that's what the Razorbacks have done. They've hit reset, lost 3 straight, but now they've won 3 straight, and over the next couple of weeks, it feels like a good chance for them to rack up some wins.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was the case too, that, Arkansas's schedule laid out where, you looked at it and you thought that maybe Arkansas could get its conference season back on track just looking at the opponents that were coming up. But you were still a little bit hesitant about that, potentially happening, just because Arkansas, it looked like had some real issues, especially turnovers, in the games that they had lost. I think they'd given up, over 80 points in most of those. But defensively, I think they found their identity. They have plugged in players who are going to give great effort and defensive energy on a nightly basis. And in the 3 consecutive wins, they haven't given up 60 points in any of those games. I think there's still some hesitation about whether this Arkansas team is legitimately back on track, just because a couple of the teams that they've beaten, not real great. And LSU was missing its starting point guard, but still to go in to LSU last weekend, win on the road against a top 15 team without your head coach, without a forward who made a big difference in the previous game, it's pretty impressive. And I think you're seeing a lot of guys step up on the defensive end. And if Arkansas wasn't JD Notae and Jalen Williams' team before Tuesday night, it definitely is now. Those 2 guys are the engines that make this team go. And, you kind of got some complementary pieces that are making big time contributions on both ends.
Scotty mentioned Eric Musselman was not with the Razorbacks during the game against LSU. Keith Smart served as the interim head coach for that game. He was going to serve as the interim coach for the game against South Carolina on Tuesday night. And then, Bob, about an hour or so before tip-off, we kind of got wind that Musselman was in the building and he was going to be coaching. And lo and behold, they made that announcement about 25 minutes before tip-off. And what kind of impact do you think it made having him back on the sideline?
Well, yeah, it was a surprise. He was supposed to or expected to miss 2 games. I always qualify that from their press release. But, yeah, I think it probably gave the players a good lift, and he'd been in practice. Like Jalen Williams said last night, they expected him there because he'd been in practice. And he was on his radio show Monday night. Keith Smart, filled in for Eric, but Eric called in and was on for a few minutes. I remember thinking he might coach the team tomorrow, and but he was talking about, how he had to get IV fluid Saturday because he got sick when he stopped taking the pain medication, or maybe it was the pain medication that made him sick. I'm not sure. And he talked about being exhausted. And I remember thinking, boy, I hope he can get through this. But he did a good job. If people were able to notice when the teams were on the other end of the court, like in front of the South Carolina bench, Eric would be possible, would kind of be in front of the bench doing things. When they came down to the other end, the Arkansas bench, he was a few feet back and was kind of protected by the scorer's table. I go, that was the doctor said, he could coach, but he had to be careful and not put himself in harm's way, so to speak. If like a player came over there diving for a ball or something, he had a little bit of protection. But watching him, he had the sling on. Of course, they couldn't raise his hands up and exhort the crowd, but he was in the huddle. I mean, obviously from where we sit, we can't see what he's drawing up, but he was in the huddle leading the team, and he was talking with the refs, and he looked like he was coaching just like normal. And I think it was a pleasant surprise for the players, and probably gave the crowd a lift, and they got excited. And I guess as painful as that shoulder is, it's even more painful for Eric not to be at the games coaching.
I noticed a few times when the ball was on the Arkansas or in front of the Arkansas bench, like you mentioned, Gus Arginal, the assistant coach, was kind of in a crouched position down 2 seats away from Musselman. And I almost wonder if he was there ready to, step in if a loose ball or something had come to the bench. I don't know. Musselman was talking to Chuck Barrett before the game on the RSN pregame show, and he said, I might only make it 10 minutes. He said, I might be way too exhausted. We're just going to have to see how this goes. And I thought they did a good job. They made it work last night, and they beat a South Carolina team. And that was South Carolina is not a very good team this year. They fell to 10-7 overall, 1-4 in SEC play. We talked about every game has its own identity. They responded real well to what the identity of the game had kind of become in the first half. And Andrew, in the second half, it looked like a completely different Arkansas team. They outscored South Carolina by 23 in the second half. Their shot selection got a lot better. We're going to talk more about that in a minute when we talk about this 3-point streak that came to an end. But they looked like a completely different team after halftime.
Yeah, I mean, at halftime, they were down 7, but they were still winning the rebounding battle, the turnover battle, and they had made 15 of 17, I believe, at the line. And so it was just kind of one of those where, like, they were playing well enough to win, but they were still losing. And then the second half, maybe it was probably some of the best basketball they've played all year, especially when they went on that 13-0 run when they were down 41-38, and then they went on a 13-0 run to take the lead. And I think that was probably the best we've seen them play to date.
Yeah, it was an 18-1 run, Scotty, at a halftime. And I think I counted South Carolina missed its first, 12 shots of the second half, and they committed 6 turnovers before they finally made a basket about 9 minutes into the half.
Yeah, it was a really good defensive stretch from Arkansas. And that first 6 minutes of the second half when Arkansas, I think, took a 51-41 lead, they had just capped off an 18-1 run. South Carolina calls timeout. We just really saw the value of JD Notae and Jalen Williams. Like they came in, they both sat. I think Jalen sat close to the last 12 minutes of the first half. JD was close to the final 8, and you just kind of saw Arkansas really struggle to get anything going offensively. Your anchor on the defensive end in the front court is out. He's still leading from the sideline, but it's different than having him, calling out what he's seeing on the floor. Being a rim protector. Pass deflector, that kind of thing. And then JD is, as erratic and, as erratic as he can be sometimes. He's, I thought at the end of the LSU game, he was a real calming presence for them. Like you felt comfortable with the ball in his hands because he's the guy that can create not only for himself, maybe better than anybody else in this league, but for others too. I think that's a really undervalued part of his game. He finished last night with 5 assists, and Jalen and JD, they assisted on 4 of Arkansas's first 5 buckets of the second half. And, they were really terrific. I think Jalen's possibly making his star turn a little bit. Like we didn't think that he could, or I didn't at least think that he could follow up what he did at LSU on Saturday. He just impacted every aspect of the game. And then, in some ways against South Carolina, he was even better. And it's really coming at a perfect time for Arkansas. I really just think you see the value of those 2 guys on the floor. Like I think they both finished like plus 20 between them in the plus minus. And that's just kind of speaks to, how good those guys are and how valuable they are.
They were Arkansas's leading scorers last night. Williams had 19 points. Note had 17. But like you mentioned, it's not just scoring. It's the assists. It's the rebounding that Williams provides. JD Note blocked 3 shots against South Carolina. Arkansas did I don't know that I've seen Arkansas under Musselman deflect more perimeter shots, shots from about 17 feet and out, as they did against South Carolina last night. There must have been 5-6 of those types. And I think I think the ability to block those shots also disrupted some other South Carolina shots. They had a lot of air balls last night. I think maybe they were trying to compensate for some of that length in front of them. Bob Note really looks like a different player to me since he came back from whatever kept him out against Mississippi State. We talked about this a little bit last week, but these last 4 games for him, including some games, or I guess 5 games, including a couple of games they've lost, he looks really good, like the JD Note that we expected. Maybe not the one that we were getting in some of their games in December.
Yeah, and after JD came back, Eric on one of our Zooms then did mention COVID with keeping JD out. So he did confirm that, even though at the time it was an illness, which I think we all knew what that was. But yeah, JD has proven he can impact the game in other ways than scoring. Obviously, 17 points is big, but I think he had 7 boards last night and several assists, and just like when they beat Missouri, and I don't know if beat's a strong enough word, walloped them, whatever you want to call it. I give him a lot of credit. Very first 2 baskets, assists by JD, got Jalen Williams going, got Kamani Johnson going before Kamani hurt his ankle. And then last night, like Scotty alluded to, JD and Jalen too, both got the offense going more with their passing than their scoring. Obviously they scored well too, but JD's just the guy that can, if he's having a bad shooting night, he can win with his defense. Like I say, I think he had 1 steal, which he's known for the steals. He's averaging nearly 3 a game, but 3 block shots, which I didn't realize he'd done that. I think 4 other times, but that was his first time doing it against like a major college team. The other ones had been against maybe lesser teams. And he can just impact the game in a lot of different ways. And obviously, opponents have to account for him offensively, which opens the way up for other guys. I don't know if they would have wanted Mississippi State with him, but obviously that impacted them. And since he's come back, he scored really well and just, played pretty well on the floor. And he got 4 fouls the last 2 games. I know the coaches don't like that, but to his credit, he played those last 9 minutes, I think it was, at LSU, and was, very instrumental in that win when they came back. And then, last night, obviously being able to stay in the game in the second half as much as he did, that was big. So, yeah, I think he just gives everybody else confidence too. I mean, I think they know he's their best player, although, Jalen's probably challenging for that with what he's doing. But JD's a senior. He's been in the program now for 3 seasons, including his redshirt year. So he's, the most experienced guy along with Connor Vanover, but obviously JD's playing a lot more minutes than Connor. And so I just think he's really important to that team in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I completely agree with you guys about JD and Jalen. Musselman has been talking all season long about this team is searching for a leader to step up. And I think during this winning streak that those guys are the 2 unquestioned leaders on this team and will be going forward. And Jalen, I think his stretch in this winning streak has just been incredible. He didn't have a double-double in his first 40-plus games of his career. And then he was 1 rebound shy of his 4th consecutive double-double in the last 4 games. So, for him to establish himself as a premier big in the SEC is not only huge for himself, but for this team that really doesn't have another guy like him that can match up with some of the bigger guys in the conference.
I think it would be criminal if Arkansas didn't go back over the game film and try to find Jalen another rebound to extend that double-double streak. I think the Philadelphia 76ers did that a couple of weeks ago when Danny Green, I think he played like 20 plus minutes and didn't record a single stat, but they went back the next day and rewatched and found like this ghost steal that they credited him with, which is pretty funny. But I think the last 2 games, just continuing on JD, I'm really high on him. Like, I think he's arguably one of the top 5 players in the league that's got a lot of really good guys and a lot of guys that can create and impact both ends of the floor really well. But the last 2 games, I think we saw just how crippling JD's dribble penetration can be on a defense. Like he's so good at just getting into the middle of the floor and either, rising up for that little short floater from the SEC logo, maybe getting all the way to the rim, or kind of like what we saw when, Arkansas started its comeback when they were down 8 at LSU. He got to the SEC logo, kicked out to Devo for a 3 on the left wing. Like, that's the stuff that a lot of people maybe don't give JD enough credit for is just he will pass the ball. And I think against Vanderbilt a few games ago, he had 17 potential assists. So he's looking for his teammates too, and he's pushing for that, league scoring lead too. So I mean, he's doing a little bit of everything, and I think he's just been really terrific.
Speaking of missing stats, I thought Audice Tony might have gotten shorted a rebound last night. He ends up with 13 points and 8 rebounds, really near a double-double for him. One of the better games that we've seen him play over the last couple of months. Stanley Moody finished with, I thought, kind of a quiet 12 points, but certainly a big 12 points in that game. One other thought on Jalen Williams is that I think in the first 6 minutes of the game, he drew 5 fouls against South Carolina, 4 on the offensive end, and he also drew a charge. Scotty, you'd know this better than I do, but I think he might have a charge drawn in every SEC game played this year, or most of them for sure. He's been really good in that regard. I think, what did he have, 4 against LSU down in Baton Rouge on Saturday? So he's been really good at drawing charges. All right, let's talk about the 3-point streak. That's what everybody's talking about today. And kind of interesting to me that this has drawn so much attention. 1,092 games, Arkansas had made a 3-point basket dating to January 7th of 1989. That was previously the last time that they didn't make a 3-pointer. In that game at Texas, Lee Mayberry and Cannon Whitby attempted 1 3-pointer apiece. That's it. That tells you a little bit about what the game was like in that day and age. I don't know that I would ever predict Arkansas not to make a 3-point shot, especially when they were playing in their home gym. But I think if you look in retrospect, maybe last night made a little bit of sense. I mean, you've got a Frank Martin coach team defensively. Those guys are always really hard-nosed. And then you just got an Arkansas team that we sound like a broken record. They do not shoot the 3-point shot well this year. You go back through their 5 games prior to last night, they were 8 of 27 against Mississippi State, 6 of 22 against Vanderbilt, 6 of 19 against A&M, 4 of 19 against Missouri, 5 of 17 against LSU. But in that LSU game, they didn't make a 3-pointer in the first half. They were 0 for 8 at halftime. In the last 2 games, they're 0 for 15 in the first half on their 3-point attempts. They're shooting 25% in SEC play from beyond the arc, just a little bit shy of 29% on the season. Shot selection, I thought, was really good in the second half last night. The 3-pointer was not falling, and they did as good of a job as I've seen of getting to the rim or settling for mid-range jump shots. It reminded me of a Jimmy Witt game a couple of years ago where everybody talked about he's the mid-range king. Arkansas did a really good job of shot selection, and I think that's why they didn't hit a 3 last night. I think that they could have taken a couple of bad 3-point attempts and maybe one of them falls, but what really stands out to me is that they only took 11 3-pointers, and that's quite a bit under their season average. And I think it's because their shot selection was really good in the second half.
I give him credit for playing the game the right way. I think JD took the last 3 with a little under 5 minutes to play. And of course, I guess to show you what a life the streak took on, the fans knew they hadn't hit a 3, and they knew they had a long streak going. And probably the last, 7, 8 possessions, Arkansas was comfortably ahead, and but still had their starters in because they're trying to close the game out. And they're trying to work the clock, and you could hear fans yelling 3, 3, like take a 3. And the Razorbacks could have hoisted some up. You had some 3-point shoot. Like you said, they're not a good 3-point shooting team, but obviously JD takes 3s, and Devo, and heck, Jalen hit the big 3. That was one thing about LSU. They didn't shoot the 3 well, but man, late in the game when they needed some, JD hit a couple, and Jalen hit one. But we asked Eric and we got JD and Jalen after the game for interviews, and just to summarize, kind of paraphrase, they're basically saying, hey, we were driving the ball, we were getting to the line, they hit 27 to 33 free throws. So the game plan was to attack the basket. That's what was working. So why jack up 3? So I'll give him credit for playing the game the right way and not sort of, jacking up some 3s just to try to keep the streak going, although it obviously for the program, the fans, it would have been great if the streak was going, but all good things come to an end eventually.
I was still working in the Bud Walton media room last night and trying to put together my sidebar on Jalen, and Matt Zimmerman sent me a text. I thought he put the Arkansas's 3-point streak in pretty cool perspective. I'm going to read that text. he said, I prefer to think of all the great threes we made during those 33 years. So many great players hit those, like Todd Day and Lee Mayberry and Scotty Thurman and Clint McDaniel and Alex Dillard and Pat Bradley and Joe Johnson and Bobby Portis and Moses Moody, and somewhat lesser remembered ones like Kiko Hadar and Cannon Whitby and Guy Whitney and Anthon Bell and Kai Madden and Charles Tatum and Blake Edens and Jonathan Holmes. What a beautiful streak it was. I mean, Z's got really cool perspective on that. And he also said, my friend Terry Prentice, who's now a deputy AD at Arkansas, was born on January 7th, 1989. And that's the last time Arkansas didn't make a three. It obviously it goes beyond when it goes back before I was born. I didn't think I never thought that Arkansas's 3-point streak would ever, come into question. But I think Bob hit the nail on the head, and Matt too. Like, their shot selection in the second half, was really good. And I thought they didn't have to take threes because their off-ball activity and movement was so good. Audice Toney, Trey Wade, Devo Davis moved away from the basketball really, really well, and all got layups. And even on some missed shots, even some missed threes, like Audice Toney's there for an offensive rebound and a putback immediately. And so they, you score without hitting a three. And I also thought Arkansas got out and ran in transition. They were pretty opportunistic there too. So pretty effective ways to score, when your shot beyond the arc's not dropping.
The Basketball Podcast of Mid-America is brought to you by Landers Toyota of Northwest Arkansas. Visit their location at 411 South Metro Parkway in Rogers, or online at landerstoyotanwa.com.
For all your automotive needs, shop Landers Toyota NWA in Rogers, where we guarantee you the best buying experience and best service after the sale in Arkansas. Landers Toyota NWA in Rogers.
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today.
Mentioned Arkansas is 3-3 in the SEC. A&M comes to Bud Walton Arena on Saturday night. That's a 7:30 tip-off, and the game will be on SEC Network. The Aggies have only lost 2 games this season. They're kind of like Arkansas. Their schedule is backloaded, where they play the better teams on their schedule later in the season, and so don't know that I'm really buying A&M as a 2-loss team right now. They have 2 losses. I just don't know that it's your typical 2-loss team at this point in the season. I saw where they did get a few votes in the AP poll this week. Speaking of the AP poll, LSU fell 1 spot to number 13 after their loss to Arkansas last Saturday, 65-58 at the PMAC in Baton Rouge. The Razorbacks trailed that game by 8 points with 9 minutes left, and then closed the game on a 17-2 run. It was the first time this season that LSU has lost at home, and their only other loss this year was to Auburn, who's number 2 in the AP poll this week. Scotty, that was I don't know that there's another game that compares to it in terms of the best all-around performance that Arkansas has had this season. Offensively, it wasn't pretty. LSU will do that to you. They're a really good defensive team. But, man, I thought Arkansas just answered the bell so many times down there. And to do it without Kamani Johnson, who was on the sideline, to do it without Eric Musselman, who was back in Fayetteville, a really impressive win.
Yeah, no question. And I didn't know what to expect whatsoever from Arkansas going into that game. Eric's out. Keith Smart stepping up. I didn't really have any questions about Keith Smart stepping into the interim head coach position. I mean, the guy, if you've listened to any of his press conferences, you know that the guy's a pro. And that was really evidenced, I thought, by, he calls a timeout with about 9 minutes left and Arkansas is down 8. And the PMAC is probably as alive as it's been all day. They're probably, the fans are feeling, the players are feeling, the coaching staff is feeling for LSU that they've got Arkansas on the ropes, and if we hit them with another punch, then they're going to be down for the count. But Keith Smart just sat the guys down and was like, listen, you guys just need to breathe, because you need clarity in your mind right now. You've got to forget about what has happened that's gotten you down 8 points. And it didn't, that message didn't really seem like it was working immediately, because I think Arkansas inbounded the ball after that timeout and got a 10-second violation, couldn't get the ball across half court. But defensively, I think they really flushed what led to that run for LSU. JD and Jalen, just again, I just keep going back to them. They just had their fingerprints all over that game, especially the closing stretch run for Arkansas there too. But I mentioned Arkansas's complementary pieces around those two guys. I need to give a shout out to Stanley Moody for the way that he has defended in SEC play. He went into that South Carolina game last night. Opponents were 7 of 34 from the floor shooting against him. I'm at about the 12-minute mark of the rewatch of the South Carolina game, and he's given up 1 bucket on 7 shots. So the guy is playing just absolutely lights out. Like, anytime you're holding your matchup to around 20% from the floor, it's pretty incredible. Like, Moses Moody was doing some similar things last night, and Audice Toney. I mean, we just get back to anytime he's playing really active and being productive, we always go back to his run in Kansas City and what he was doing earlier in the year. He had a double-double in his debut here. He's been really good. I think those two guys are just such important role players, and they're impacting a lot of different areas on the floor, and they're really contributing to Arkansas's uptick in defensive effort, intensity, and they're a really big reason why Arkansas is playing its best defensive ball of the year.
Yeah, going into that game against LSU, all the talk was about LSU swarming defense and how great they were on the defensive end. But I thought it was Arkansas that really showed out defensively and showed major improvement from what they had earlier in the season, to hold the number 12 ranked team in the country to, I think it was 2 points in the last 9 minutes of the game. I mean, they can do that consistently. They're going to win a lot more ball games.
Bob, I was really impressed with Jalen Williams' play against LSU. I think he finished with 11 points and 13 rebounds, but there was a stretch right after LSU had gone ahead 56-48. On 3 of the next 4 possessions, Jalen got 2 steals and he drew a charge. And I thought those were really game-changing plays.
Yeah, he just does a lot of things that, they probably need to create a taking charges stat in their box score for Jalen. It just maybe like assist should have been for those guys. Yeah, Jalen just early in the year he was passing so well. He was getting out there kind of as a point forward. They'd been struggling to get assists. They're doing better with that now. JD's got a lot of assists. Devo's got a lot of assists, but now Jalen's gotten more aggressive, looking for a shot more. There were times I'm sure people watching would say, "Take that shot, and now he is taking that shot, and he's taking charges and he's getting rebounds, and he's just making game-winning plays. Some that show up in the box score like points and rebounds, some that don't, like taking those charges, or just making a good pass. Maybe it's not an assist, but it's the pass that leads to the assist." And there's maybe a few times he's tried to thread the needle a little too finely, maybe like Brett Favre threw a few interceptions, but he seems to have, gotten back on track with this. He's got a really good assist to turnover ratio, especially for a big man. Normally you look at stats for big men, they're going to have more turnovers than assists, not like a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio like Jalen does. That's very rare, I think, in college basketball at a high level. So he's just doing a lot of things on both ends of the floor, kind of like JD, but he's doing it from a big man standpoint. JD's doing it from a guard standpoint.
The only thing I can add to that is I thought, when Jalen came up with that defensive rebound and tossed the ball, he's falling out of bounds opposite of the LSU bench, and he tosses the ball off of Alex Fudge's hip. I mean, that's just, you can't teach that. That's uncoachable basketball IQ. And if Arkansas, I think Arkansas is playing with better basketball IQ lately, and I think last night's game in terms of shot selection, kind of speaks to that. But that was one of the most impressive impromptu basketball IQ moments that I've seen from an Arkansas player in a really, really long time. So props to Jalen for that. It's just the kind of player he is. And I think he's been that way since, his days at Northside.
That's another stat Arkansas needs to have: the box score, falling out of bounds, knocking the ball off an opposing player. They need to add that and taking charges to their box score.
So Arkansas lost its first 3 conference games. They've won 3 straight. We talked about after they had lost to Vanderbilt, a really bad loss. Can they be a 500 team in SEC this year? Well, in order to do that, you got to go steal one somewhere, and they stole it at LSU. So now you're at 3-3. Really, it's about how you do over your next 12 conference games. They've got the West Virginia non-conference game thrown in there as well. But let's just look up over the next couple of weeks at their schedule. Mentioned A&M at home on Saturday night. They go to Ole Miss next Wednesday. Ole Miss just lost by 25 to Missouri at home. And if Arkansas beating Missouri by 44 last week was the most surprising score in the SEC, I think Missouri over Ole Miss by 25 at Oxford has to be right up there with it. West Virginia comes into Bud Walton next weekend, a week from Saturday. West Virginia 13-4 this year. They've lost a couple of straight to Kansas, lost real bad at Fog Allen over the weekend, lost last night to Baylor. And then the Razorbacks go to Georgia, a team that really kind of feels like they're in season on the brink territory now with Tom Crean and his future in Athens. What do you think about these next 4 games, Scotty, and how this shapes up for Arkansas before a couple of back-to-back home games against Mississippi State and Auburn in early February?
I think their next, 5 games, 4 of those are in league play. You got A&M at home. That's very winnable. Mississippi on the road, that's winnable. If, Missouri's doing it, then Arkansas's obviously got a pretty good shot. And then your next league game is at Georgia. It's probably they might be the worst team in the SEC by far. And then you've got Mississippi State on your home floor. And then that's kind of, I think this next 5 games, you can throw the West Virginia game in there. That's going to be a really good test that kind of sandwich those 4 league games. I think it's a really good primer for this Arkansas team before its league schedule gets really, really tough. I mean, because after that, you've got Auburn, Alabama, back to back. You play Missouri on the road. I mean, no matter what you think about Missouri, it's kind of hard to play there. I mean, you can just ask Alabama that. And then you've got Tennessee, Florida, Kentucky, LSU, Tennessee to finish out. You've got to like really get glued together over this next 5 games, because I think your metal's really going to get tested once February starts.
Bob, you feel like they can hit 500? Do you feel like the LSU game changes your thoughts on the rest of their season?
Yeah, like you said, you lose one at home to Vanderbilt or whoever, and if you need to steal one on the road, which they did that at LSU of all places, and I think there are some more winnable road games coming up. That doesn't mean they're going to do it. Obviously, they have to focus on A&M, and these are quote revenge games against A&M and Mississippi State, who Arkansas lost to them on the road, and there's no disgrace in losing those teams on the road. They're both having good seasons. Alabama just lost to Mississippi State, and A&M's always been a tough place for Arkansas to win. Not from the Southwest Conference days so much, but since they got back and since they both got since A&M joined the SEC. Mike Anderson I don't think he ever won there when he was at Missouri. Of course, those were the Billy Gillespie teams that were really good for the most part. But all these games have been sold out since before the season, and they've had some good crowds. On the box, they put the 19-2 or whatever it is because it's a sellout. We don't exactly know what the crowds are. I'd say they're like, I don't know, maybe last night, maybe there was 12,000 or something. I'm not sure. Might be wrong about that. But I think Saturday night, for the first time, they might have a near capacity crowd because it's Saturday night. Unfortunately, it's going against the Packers game, so you can't blame Packers fans for not showing up. I wish they'd move the game, one or the other, to a day. But, it's A&M, an old traditional rival. A&M beat them already. A&M's got to play Kentucky tonight at home. If they win that game, I mean, man. But even if they lose it, they're still having a really good year. The Razorbacks are playing well. There's really no excuse for the fans not to show up in big numbers. It's Saturday night. It's a good opponent. Arkansas is playing well. So I think for the first time, we're going to see kind of an old, timey Bud Walton Arena crowd. And I think that'll really boost Arkansas. And I think, these other games coming up at home, they've got a good home stretch. I think the crowds are going to get, bigger and better. Although the fans that have been there have really been good because they're hardcore fans to be showing up for some of these games. And when they're all on TV or maybe not at convenient times, and maybe the Razorbacks aren't playing as well as they are now. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really good atmosphere Saturday night.
The audacity of Arkansas to put a basketball game against the Packers. Bob, maybe we can get you an outdoor Razorback game at Lambeau in a future year to make up for this.
Bob was lobbying for a different start time with Arkansas's SID last night. I just don't think it really resonated with him.
I'm going to try to reach out to Greg Sankey, see what we can work out. Or maybe I'll reach out to the NFL, see if they can move the Packer 49ers game to a day game. I mean, really, who wants to play a night game at Lambeau? It's so cold. I know they do it for TV rankings, but seriously, they should think of the fans, think of the players. They don't need to be playing these cold weather games at night. I really don't think it's fair to the players and the fans that are there.
Mentioned A&M, by the way, they're 15-2. They're going to play Kentucky on Wednesday night, so it'll be interesting to see if they've still got that winning streak intact when they come to Bud Walton. That game is in College Station. A&M is 10-0 this season at home, and they've won 8 straight games overall going into their game against Kentucky. Arkansas and the Aggies will play at 7:30 on Saturday night at Bud Walton Arena. Make sure to come to WholeHogSports.com before, during, and after the game for all of our coverage. Also, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. You can find it on Apple or Spotify if you search Whole Hog Radio. That's 3 words, WHOLEHOGRADIO, Whole Hog Radio. Make sure to leave us a review. It'll help others find our podcast. For Bob Holt and Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us on the Basketball Podcast of Mid-America, and we'll see you again next week.
The proceeding has been a production of WholeHogSports.com. Look for our latest podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at WholeHogSports.com for the latest news and commentary.